Hi everyone, Dr. K, naturopathic sports medicine doctor. Today with you for the final video of the life-saving series. So if you're just joining in, start over at the intro, come on down through the rest of the videos, and this one might make sense. So essentially what I'm going to go through is common questions that I get in class when people are taking CPR with me. So I'm just going to read off some of the questions and go through. So is doing CPR on the mannequin like doing it in real life? So I've had feedback from firefighters and paramedics and nurses, and it's a bit of a mixed bag as far as answers. Some of them say it is very similar. Some of them say it is similar up to a point, like the difficulty, like the pressure from the mannequin and the resistance can be similar in the beginning. And then once rib fracture happens, which is very common with CPR, then it becomes much easier to do your compressions. So I think it really depends on the rescuer. Some rescuers, if you have an injury or if, you have a bigger victim and a smaller rescuer, for example, then it might seem more difficult. Also, it depends on, if this is your loved one that you're doing CPR on, I think it's going to become more exhausting when it's somebody that you love. And I think people don't realize that when you're giving the rescue breaths and doing that all for yourself, it is very tiring. Whereas when you're a healthcare provider, you use a bag valve mask, which is a mask that goes on the face and it has a bag attached to it that, you can compress, and that's what is giving the breaths for the person. So as I say, I think it's one of those questions that it depends. And let's see. Why do people throw up when they're getting CPR? So hopefully they don't, but it is also another common thing that might happen. And the reason for that is that the air that you're putting in is actually going into the esophagus and into the stomach, and then stomach does not like that inflation and then forces everything up. So, we talk about the head tilt chin lift, and that's to open the airway, and that is hopefully so that your breaths are going through the trachea down to the lungs and getting where it needs to go. Should I try to crack the ribs while doing CPR? No, you shouldn't try to, but as I say, it is a common thing. And sometimes it's not even the ribs that are cracking, sometimes it's just the cartilage, because you have that sternal connection, you have cartilage, and then you have the ribs. So you shouldn't try to. It's not necessarily going to make CPR any easier, but it does happen. Do I have to do mouth to mouth? So no, you don't have to do it. Now remember that when you're doing the compressions, you're acting as the person's heart. When you're doing the respiration, so breathing into them, you're acting as their lungs, providing oxygen and, hopefully pumping that oxygen around the body in hopes that you can keep them going long enough for help to arrive. If it's an adult, they have a reserve in their body because they're big enough. They might have 5 minutes, if you're lucky, of oxygen reserve to keep them going even without the breaths. If it's a child or an infant, they absolutely need the breaths. They're too small. They're going to go through that oxygen super quick. They have a higher heart rate than adults. So again, super important to do some sort of respiration on an infant or child. On an adult, you can get away without it. Yeah, again, it's up to your comfort. Remember, the scene survey is determining if you're safe or not. If you don't feel safe, then you shouldn't do it. How do I activate the Good Samaritan Act? So if you go back to the video on consent and the Good Samaritan Act, as long as you say your name, your training, and can I help you, you're fully covered. When using an AED, what needs to be removed? So anything that is going to impact the connection of the pads directly to the skin to provide that electrical impulse needs to be removed. So any jewelry, you don't need to take it off. You can just move it out of the way. The only exception to that is a nipple piercing, because you can imagine if you're there trying to mess around with that for who knows how long, it's wasting time, and that person doesn't have time if you're using the AED. So for that, they're going to get a contact burn, and honestly, that's okay if that's the least of their concerns at that point. But any water or moisture or hair does need to be removed from that area, so either toweled off, and in the case of hair, if it's going to impact how the adhesion is happening from the pad to the skin, then you do need to remove it. All AEDs come with a razor, or if you're really short on time, then they do come with an extra set of pads, so you can just place the pad where you are putting it and just quickly do a wax situation if you can. So as I say, just the pad adhesion to the skin is the most important. Lastly, how likely is CPR to work? The stats on CPR, I mean, there's a ton of stats out there. The latest one I think is like 5 to 7% doing CPR alone, and then when you add in the AED, then you're up at 60 to 70%. So it's not great, but you can imagine that if you do nothing, the person is going to die, and if you give them a 5 to 7% chance, then that's 5 to 7% more than what they had, which was nothing. So that's why it's so important to act. And as I say, if the only first aid you know is to call 911 and get help, then do that and stay with the person and just do what you can, but definitely do something. All right, guys, hope you enjoyed this series and learned something, took something away. And if anything, definitely get in contact with your local St. John's Ambulance, Rescue 7, any provider that's going to get you this type of training in person. All right, hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you soon.